Hello everyone, this is Gautam from Shailaja IS, and in this video we'll be discussing on the National Green Tribunal's verdict on your Great Nicobar project, which was given in February 2026. National Green Tribunal is a statutory body, that is a body which has been established by a law passed by Parliament, right? Established in 2010. It specifically deals with environmental issues. Okay, it specifically deals with implementation of environmental laws or any disputes that are arising out of environmental laws. The composition of it consists of both judicial members as well as expert members. Expert members are those who are having expertise in environmental policy, in environmental management and environmental conservation. So they will be a part of this tribunal in order to determine any issues that are arising out of environmental issues, right? For example, a project needs to get environmental clearance because it is undertaking, it is cutting down trees or it is clearing down certain stretches of forest. So it has to take environmental clearance. So certain members of the society can file a case in National Green Tribunal that environmental clearance has not happened in a clear manner. They have not given consent for this particular project. And NGT is going to determine on this. Okay, so I think the basic function of it is a specialized judicial body which deals with environmental disputes, right? Great Nicobar project we'll try and understand in detail, but it was conceptualized by NITI Aayog, finally accepted by Union Cabinet in 2021. 2022, it got environmental clearance from Union Environment Ministry. 2023, it started bidding, or it started the project implementation, asking for bids of who is going to take part in this construction of this mega infrastructure project. But there were constant protests from environmental activists on the grounds that this project is having a very huge environmental cost. So there were disputes that were happening, there were protests that were happening, and the case was filed in National Green Tribunal, and in February 2026, the National Green Tribunal has given its verdict. As it sided with your environmental activists, as it sided with the union government with regard to going ahead with the mega infrastructure project, we'll try and see in the video, right? So let us start this. In this video, I think we'll take it in a very logical manner. First, we'll try and understand what is this Great Nicobar project itself, what does it entail, what is the purpose behind it. We'll also try and understand what are some of the concerns that are expressed by your environmental activists, what are the criticisms of this project from an ecological perspective. We'll try and understand the evolution of environmental governance in India. Okay, so before we look into the NGT verdict and its criticism, we'll first try and have a brief idea of how environmental governance in India has evolved over the last 7 decades, right? And then we'll finally look into the verdict and its criticisms. See, first and foremost thing, as I already told you, it was conceptualized by NITI Aayog. The idea or the objective of this entire mega infrastructure project is to transform this Great Nicobar Island into an economic and strategic hub. So what all does it contain? The total funding of the project, or the costing of the project, is estimated to be 80,000 crore rupees. Initially it was 70,000 crore rupees, but in the last 4 to 5 years they have increased it to 80,000 crore rupees. In the coming years, by the time the project sees a completion, I am sure that it is going to boost up further. But what does it entail? First and foremost, it entails your international transshipment port. It is just 40 nautical miles away from your Strait of Malacca. So the argument is that it can emerge as a new international port, competing with the Colombo port of your Sri Lanka. So there is a huge potential of India or the Great Nicobar Islands itself transitioning into one of the major ports or a major international transshipment ports. That is the idea which they have given. And it is also establishing your Greenfield International Airport. A new airport is going to be conducted, and it is going to have a dual purpose. whereby it will be used even for civilian purposes as well as for military purposes. So there is a seaport, there is an international airport. Both are having dual purposes. Both can be used for civil purposes or commercial purposes, and it can also be used for strategic or military purposes. So idea is that India's submarines can port over here. India's you can say fighter jets or all those air force can have a station in this Great Nicobar Islands, because it is very close to your Malacca Strait. I think Malacca Strait, everyone knows, it's a small piece of water which connects your Pacific Ocean with your Indian Ocean. It passes through your Indonesia, Malaysia part. I think the map part of it, you are very well aware about it, right? So idea is that it is not only having an economic objective, it is also having a strategic objective to increase the India's military presence in the Great Nicobar Islands region, primarily because of its proximity to Strait of Malacca. Why Strait of Malacca is important? Because nearly 40% of the total global trade volume passes through this particular strait. So in order to make sure that China doesn't have an undue influence in the region, India is trying to step up its military presence in the Great Nicobar Islands through this particular mega infrastructure project. Along with that, they're also establishing power plants, solar power plants. They're establishing townships which can house nearly 3.5 lakh people. Okay, so that is more than whatever is the population residing in this Great Nicobar Islands, the indigenous population that are residing in this Great Nicobar Islands, right? Now, the concerns that are expressed, the first and foremost concern is that 130 square kilometers of tropical rainforest needs to be cleared for this project. So that's a huge hit. Okay, the 133 square kilometers is a huge, so nearly lakhs of trees are going to be cleared for this particular project. Also, the Great Nicobar Islands is a part of UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, which is hosting nearly 650 endemic species. Endemic species means those species which are only and only present in that particular region. Those species are not found anywhere else in the world, and there are more than 650 such species which are endemic in that Great Nicobar Islands. So this construction project is going to threaten this endemic species, and it is going to disturb this biosphere, UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, right? See, your giant leatherback turtles is having its nesting site in this Great Nicobar Islands. There are other multiple endemic species, and your coral reefs are also poised to be destructed because of this infrastructure project. So overall, the argument is that the ecological damage is going to be much more deeper and much more higher, and all this damage is irreversible in nature, is the argument by environmental activists, right? Also, they say that the island is situated in your seismic zone 5, which is highly vulnerable zone for your earthquakes. So all these infrastructure projects may not have that resilience in case of any future earthquakes. So they say that the location, even though it is making strategic sense, from a disaster perspective or from an ecological perspective, the cost is outweighing it, is the argument by environmental activists. True, there is a strategic advantage by establishing a port and an airport, transshipment port and an airport, but the damage, the cost that you are imposing it on the environmental part through destruction of forests, by threatening of endemic species, or that is going to far outweigh the advantages, is the argument. Okay, from an human angle, from an human impact perspective, there is also an argument that the Nicobarese communities or the indigenous Shompen communities, which are particularly vulnerable tribal groups, they are identified as particularly vulnerable tribal groups. They will be unduly displaced from their existing residence, right? So they are living in this forest for centuries, and because of this project, they have to move out from their homeland and take shelter in other places. So even though government is saying that they have given consent for this project, they will be rehabilitated properly, but there is, you can say, deficit with regard to the transparency in this bureaucratic process. Everything is now remaining on the paper, right? So consent has now been reduced to a procedural framework. We really don't know if they have really given the work, or is it been fudged by the administrative officials over there. So that is also the criticism given by certain environmental activists, right? And they also say that since 3.5 lakh people are going to be stationed there in the coming future, the freshwater resources is going to be in the threat, and it might lead to a water crisis in the foreseeable future, right? So these are all some of the, we can say, ecological concerns that has been expressed on this Great Nicobar mega infrastructure project. Now, before we move into what was exactly the verdict of National Green Tribunal, we'll first try and understand the evolution of environmental governance in India. See, since ancient times, it is not like that ancient times the rulers neglected conservation of environment. Certainly not. In your Kautilya's Arthashastra, there has been, you can say, provisions which clearly provide punishment or penalties for people clearing out forest or for killing of certain wildlife species. Also, your Ashokan edicts, the pillars by Ashokan Empire, clearly some of them have given the provisions or penalties for killing certain wildlife species like parrot and other such things. So environmental conservation is not something which is modern, especially for Indian civilization. It has always been an integral part of our administration from our ancient time period, right? See, the concept of sacred groves or community sacred groves, in Kannada we call it as Devara Kadu. It clearly shows that how communities took up the responsibility for protection of the forest patches of land, and they equated that with religious worship. That was one of the ingenious way or innovative way of protecting the forest resources. Okay, so whatever now we are saying as protected areas like national parks, biosphere reserve, these are all new terminologies. Ultimately, what is happening is they are trying to limit the activities in these protected areas. Same thing was done earlier through a different format of a sacred grove, okay, where they said that this is a divine residing place and we should not tinker too much with that particular forest patch. Okay, so from ancient times, forest conservation or sustainable development has been an integral part of India's civilizational growth story. But what happened in colonial time period is the Britishers viewed forest as a resource to exploit, as a mine where they can extract timber resources for railway expansion. So I think railways, as you all know, the railway tracks, the below of it is the wooden planks, and all of that has to be, you can say, extracted from the trees or from the forest itself. So your British administrative policies viewed forest from a more exploitative lens. They did not view it from a lens of integral part of human life. They view it as something which needs to be exploited for my own growth and expansion. And it passed your Indian Forest Act in 1927, which restricted access for the communities to the forest itself, right? So, and that somewhere continued in the early decades of your independence also, because from 1950s and 60s, India was primarily focusing on establishing its own democratic institutions, trying to keep the entire country together, trying to address some of, you can say, the federalism issues, trying to focus on kickstarting the growth. So there wasn't really too much of a concentration on environmental conservation. But this changed in the early 1970s, especially from Indira Gandhi era. At an international level also, there was a landmark event that happened called as the Stockholm Conference in 1972 under the aegis of United Nations, where for the first time environmental conservation was brought in as the central discussion point of development and growth. They said that if you are wanting to talk about growth and development, you have to simultaneously also talk about the environmental cost associated with it. Okay, so earlier it was all in periphery, people were only focusing on growth numbers. But for 1972, first time under the United Nations, everyone came together and they said, no, when we talk about economic growth, we should also talk about the environmental cost associated with it. Right? And eventually, over the decades, finally this Stockholm conference led to your 1992 Rio Earth Summit, which finally gave rise to your United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Over a period of years, it led to various conventions, protocols, the latest of which is your Paris Accord of 2015. Right? But the starting point was your Stockholm conference. So international level also there was a shift with regard to environmental conservation that reflected even in the Indian domestic laws, where Wildlife Protection Act was passed in 1972. Right? And eventually in 1976 through 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, the government inserted Article 48A and 51G. One which is a directive principle of state policy which directs the state to take measures to conserve environment. Second is a fundamental duty which directs citizens to be conscious about environmental conservation. Okay, so it was integrated into the constitution itself through your state duties and fundamental duties. Right? And eventually in 1980, Forest Conservation Act was passed. Your Air Pollution Prevention Act, Water Pollution Prevention Act was also passed in this particular decade itself. So this was an era of awakening where they increasingly realized that environmental conservation cannot be neglected. It has to be an integral part of our growth story, right? And it established the constitutional moral compass for the future decades. The third phase is your final institutional phase, where your Bhopal gas tragedy happened in 1984, and they said that we need to have more oversight or monitoring on the functioning of the industries itself. And 1986, your Environmental Protection Act was passed, whereby environmental impact assessment was supposed to be done. For example, if government wants to establish tomorrow a airport in the border region or in an Himalayan region, for example in Nagaland, if it wants to establish a small airport, then it has to get environmental impact assessment done. It means that if I am implementing this project, what is going to be the impact on the environment? I'm going to assess that impact and I'm going to put it in front of the public. Public is going to outweigh what is the pros and cons of it. If there are any objections, it will be inculcated into the project itself. Okay, so but you have to do this before implementing the project. Environmental impact assessment became an integral part of all your industrial projects or government mega projects, right? And environmental clearance became mandatory part of it. Okay, suppose in Western Ghats, the government wants to construct a highway or a railway line or a semiconductor chip factory, whatever it is, first it has to get environmental clearance. For that, environmental impact assessment has to be done. It has to assess if this, what is the environmental cost of this project. It has to suggest certain rectificatory measures, and only then the clearance will be given, only then the project will take off, right? So that became an integral part of the developmental procedure itself, right? Even your judiciary stepped in, and through various cases it strengthened this environmental governance. Okay, your MC Mehta case clearly said whoever is polluting, they have to pay for the damage that has been caused. And another doctrine called as public trust doctrine emerged, which said that it is the it is the trust of the public in order to conserve this forest, in order to undertake environmental conservation, right? And in 2010, it reached a peak by establishment of a specialized body called as the National Green Tribunal, which is a statutory body it wanted to fast track your disposal of environmental cases. It had expert members along with your judicial members, as I told you in the beginning itself. So it moved from a general category disputes to a more specific category disputes with expert opinion and expert inputs in order to determine these environmental issues, right? Therefore, the scrutiny of developmental projects was happening on a scientific basis through the establishment of a specialized institutional body called as your National Green Tribunal. Okay, so you can see this was in your Congress Manmohan Singh era. Many of the projects were stuck primarily because they were not getting environmental clearances easily, and if at all they were getting, cases used to be filed in high courts or eventually in National Green Tribunal to resolve this. So if at all some project is announced today, it might take 5 years or 10 years to get it rolling. Similar thing what is happening in your Great Nicobar mega infrastructure project. Suppose it was China, do you think they would have waited for all these things? No. It was announced in 2021. If it was China, by 2026 they would have inaugurated. In India, that is not the case, because India is a democratic country. We have to take everyone together. We have to balance the interest of multiple stakeholders. Government alone cannot decide it. Okay, it has to take the public into confidence before moving ahead. Therefore, we have all these environmental jurisdictions, environmental laws, safeguards that have been built into these projects, right? But in your Modi 2 era, from 2019 onwards, we see some shift that is happening, primarily because ease of doing business was given prominence over environmental conservation. Now, what do you mean by why ease of doing business is coming into picture? Because suppose if I want to start a project, I first need to get environmental impact assessment done. I need to get it public opinion on it or social auditing of it. I need to get clearance from Environment Ministry. I need to get clearance from state governments. Lot of procedures. So even if I want to start a business now, for example, if Microsoft wants to start a data center in a coastal region, there are a lot of approvals that it has to get. And investors or foreign companies were saying, there are so many, the ease of doing business is very poor in India. And the government of the day felt that one of the hurdles, I'm not saying environmental clearance is the only hurdle, one of the hurdles was your environmental clearance. So they started making changes whereby it was easier to get environmental clearances. See, one of the first thing which they did was environmental impact assessment. The rules was changed in 2020, whereby post facto clearances were introduced. For example, a project has now started without getting environmental clearance, but later it can get a clearance. So you are more or less legalizing the violations for acts which was done previously. Okay, for example, Microsoft establishes a data center in coastal region without getting clearance. This rule allowed government to provide clearance after the project has started, right? So that is going against the very spirit of environmental impact assessment, right? So that was one of the dilution which happened. Forest Conservation Amendment Act was passed in 2023, which exempted your strategic and border projects from a rigorous environmental clearance. So this is a strategic project. This is a national security project. So they are saying that we need not have to go for a strict environmental clearances, right? So it for border areas, it exempted all these things. I don't need, because for me, national security is very important. I cannot sit waiting for getting clearances, because civil society will be involved, state governments will be involved, courts will be involved. If I am waiting to get clearance from all these things, China might attack me any day, I may not be prepared. So they said that for strategic and projects in border areas, I don't need any clearances. Valid argument, right? And Jan Vishwas Act was passed, where some of the minor environmental violations were decriminalized. In a sense, they said that if suppose minor environmental violations happen, you pay me a penalty, you pay me a fees, and get done with it. You need not have to go to jail. So they are decriminalized certain environmental violations, right? So all of this is pointing towards what? That a development is given priority over environmental conservation. Now, let us now come back to the National Green Tribunal verdict. Why I wanted to take the evolution of environmental governance, because it is now setting you the context of why NGT has given you that verdict, even though it's an independent body, statutory body. But look at the climate in which it is operating. Okay, where the government is having, you can say it's prioritizing more on strategic projects, national security projects, defense projects. They're not giving too much importance to environmental clearances. For them, ease of doing business is very important, rather than getting all these environmental safeguards, right? So it is in this context, your National Green Tribunal has given the verdict, because obviously your expert members are also appointed by the government itself. Even though there are judicial members, there are expert members in this body, they are also appointed by the government. So whom do you think the government is going to appoint? One who aligns with their ideology, or one who opposes with their ideology, right? So in this context, you have to understand what has been the verdict. The verdict is that the project has been given the clearance. Okay, whatever were the arguments which are given by environmental activists who filed this case, they were not able to convince National Green Tribunal. National Green Tribunal clearly stated that national security is going to take priority over ecological concerns. First thing. Second thing, they stated that whatever are the compensatory measures that is being promised by the government, because the government is saying that okay, tropical rainforests are cleared in Great Nicobar Islands, I will plant equivalent amount of trees in Aravalli Hills. That is what is the government has given in the project. Okay, you're saying that your endemic species will be threatened. They say that no, don't worry, we'll make sure that we plant certain trees. They say that corals are going to be destroyed. They say no, corals are not there at all. They're all scattered. So you don't think that corals over here is having great significance. No, nothing like what you're assuming. Corals are just scattered. It is not going to have a very deep ecological impact. Okay, and with regard to rehabilitation of the indigenous tribes, they say don't worry, we will provide them certain measures to be rehabilitated. Right? So they want to mitigate it, in the sense they don't want to prevent it. They say that let us take the project, whatever is the harm, let the harm be fulfilled. Okay, so that is the logic with which the NGT has given clearance. And moreover, when all these protests or opposition was happening, 2023 afterwards especially, when they started asking for bidding for these projects, your government constituted a high-powered committee to exactly look into this environmental opposition. High-powered committee submitted its report, but only parts of it was published to the public. And high-powered committee also said, no, nothing happening. Let us go ahead with the project. The high-powered committee also said that, don't worry, we'll go ahead with the project. Okay, it suggested some minor changes, right? That committee report was submitted to National Green Tribunal, and National Green Tribunal also said that I trust this particular report. This is because it's a government project. High-powered committee is also established by the government. I am going to trust it. Okay, you see the conflict of interest. A government-appointed committee is giving clearance to a government-appointed project, and it is being accepted by National Green Tribunal. Okay, so these are all some of the key features of the verdict of your National Green Tribunal. Let us understand the criticisms of it. First and foremost criticism is precautionary principles is now being outweighed by a mitigation principle. Okay, what is precautionary principle is that we'll wait until the safety is proven. That is a precautionary principle. But mitigation principle is what you proceed ahead, whatever is the damage caused, we'll fix that later. So that is given more importance, which is clearly shown in the verdict. Okay, and if at all any project is having a defense tag or a strategic tag, the standard rigorous scrutiny is now going to be bypassed. These are all some of the loopholes that are present in the environmental governance of our country, which is clearly reflected in this NGT verdict, right? Also, there is a deficit of data. Okay, as I told you, the high-powered committee's reports are not fully published, and your National Green Tribunal, instead of establishing another commission to understand if the authenticity of the committee report is correct or not, it relied on this government appointed committee report and given a green signal for it. So there is a conflict of interest, right? And whatever is the data that has been collected by this high-powered committee, it is all single season data, and it is not accounting only for one part of the year. It has taken the data. It is told that not great impact is going to be there for all the endemic species. Rather, the data should have been all year round, and it has ignored some of the migratory patterns of certain species, right? So there has been a data deficit part of it. Our environmental impact assessment itself has been weakened by opaqueness or non-transparency, right? Also, I told you about afforestation paradox. Government has submitted that in order to compensate for the loss of trees in your Great Nicobar Islands, I'll plant more and more trees in your Aravallis. And that is, okay, that is an absurdity. Okay, that's absurd is what we can say, because a tropical rainforest is going to play a different contributing role than a semi-arid ecosystem, right? So that is one of the biggest critics of this particular thing, right? And as I already told you before, the tribal consent has been reduced to a paperwork. Okay, we don't know the reality of if they have really accepted of this project, if their consent has been taken or not. And even the NGT has not stressed more upon getting the consent in a more transparent manner. Okay, all of this is now reduced to official paperwork, right? So that's the final part of it. If you ask me what is the gist of it, the gain is a strategic presence in Malacca Strait. The project is going to have this gain. But the cost is irreversible loss of global biodiversity hotspot. That's an irreversible thing, right? And whatever is the verdict that has been given by National Green Tribunal, it is setting a precedent whereby your national security is going to be overtaking your ecological concerns, right? So that is all about this particular issue. We have a couple of questions. Critically analyze the shortcomings of India's environmental governance through a lens of Great Nicobar verdict. So whatever we talked about environmental governance, its positives and negatives part of it, you have to write it, right? Another question is discuss the impact of infrastructure-led forest diversion on India's ecological security. That is adverse impact of infrastructure projects. What are the limitations of compensatory afforestation as a mitigation strategy? So they are saying that because that is what compensatory afforestation is happening, right? In order to compensate for the loss of tropical rainforest, you are planting trees in Aravalli. Okay, is this strategy correct or not? That is the question which has been asked. Okay. You can attempt these answers and you can send it to me on my mobile number, WhatsApp or Telegram, or on my email ID. Okay. So that's it. All the very best.